number 10 spot, we have Centralia, Pennsylvania. In the 60s, a fire broke out in the coal mines, and apparently this fire has never stopped. Yep, that's right, the underground is still burning since 1962. It continues to burn thanks to the coal reserves, and it will continue to keep burning as long as oxygen flows in. Before the fire, the town was poppin'. LOL. Okay, fine. 60s poppin', you know, the white circular glasses, big flipped out hair and loud prints, and the Beach Boys playing everywhere. That's my romanticized vision of the 60s anyway. There were 1,435 people in the town, and once the fire started, they all left, minus 10 people that don't want to leave. Apparently the movie Silent Hill was based off of this town. Makes sense. I wonder if the 10 people are staying because they have a home that's been in their family for generations and they don't want to lose it. That would possibly make me stay, however the fear of being burned to death would probs make me leave as well. If you're enjoying this video so far, smash that like button as it will really help us out. In our number 9 spot, we have Mount Vesuvius. Yep, there have been many volcanoes that have wiped out cities, and this one in particular did quite a lot of damage. For the citizens of Pompeii in 79 AD, one day they were doing the washing and fighting on horseback. Guys, I tried to Google what the heck normal people did in that time, and you would be surprised how hard a simple question like this is to answer. Anyways, they were doing some washing and fighting somewhere, I'm sure. And the next, they were being hit by the violent Mount Vesuvius that was wiping them away. There were only a few survivors. The eruption left the town in ruins for a very, very long time. The eruption of the volcano is said to be one of the most catastrophic in human history, resulting in a very destructive earthquake after it, as well as many deaths from the air pollution. In our number 8 spot, we have Greensburg, Kansas. In 2007, there was a tornado in Greensburg, Kansas that caused a great devastation to the town. It is said that about 95% of the town was completely destroyed, but the other 5% was also severely damaged. 11 people were killed in the tragedy, and after it, more than half of the population moved out of the town for good. But that honestly makes sense, because if the town was destroyed so badly, then it doesn't make sense to stay, perhaps only to just help with the cleanup. Apparently, during the rebuilding process, the town began to make some more greener choices and created a new building dedicated to leadership in energy and environmental design that runs on 100% renewable energy. So there's at least some good arising from such a tragedy. In our number 7 spot, we have Kennett, California. In the early 1930s, the town of Kennett in California was known as a very important copper mining town. Apparently, it was the largest in the area until 1935, when it started to become flooded by Shasta Lake. It was flooded by the lake while the Shasta Dam was being created, unfortunately. The government had been considering building the dam since 1870, so it's really just a shame that they thought about it for 60 plus years before doing anything, and at that point it was too late. Most people thankfully sold their homes to the government before the water got too high, and of course abandoned the town. 1 year before the dam was projected to be finished in 1944, the town was completely underwater. Thankfully, it doesn't appear that anyone died from this incident. They all just left the town due to the crisis. In our number 6 spot, we have Beauvais in France. There is a small village in France called Beauvais. I could be pronouncing it wrong, so apologies if I am. This is a very mysterious village, as with no warning in the 70s, it was completely wiped off the map after the creation of Canjous, a military camp. I could also be pronouncing that wrong. I'm not French, so I tried. There are seemingly no reasons why, and what adds to the mysteriousness of the situation, even the military eventually abandoned the site, which was being used as a quote-unquote training ground, and supposedly it was abandoned due to it being too dangerous. Too dangerous for the military? What is there, some kind of black hole in this village? Let's brainstorm. Do you think it's A, a black hole, B, an alien takeover, or C, perhaps some kind of accidental nuclear testing was done there and that's why it needs to be abandoned? I don't know, leave your thoughts in the comment section below. Whatever the reason, it is extremely weird and suspicious, that's for sure. In our number 5 spot, we have Indianola. Prior to 1875, there was a town called Indianola that was located in Texas that was thriving. But in 1875, the town was hit by a disastrous hurricane that nearly wiped out the entire population, killing hundreds of people. The town, of course, began to rebuild and persevere after this tragedy, only to be hit again by another massive hurricane, and this one was even worse, and the town had to be deserted. By 1887, it was declared dead and the post office permanently closed. Much of the town is still underwater today. That's wild. Before researching this video, I had no idea about all of these towns that have been submerged underwater, and it just makes you think Atlantis could have been one of them at some point in history. I don't know. I believe it. Coming up in our number 4 spot, we have the town of Yangshu. In 2008, there was a massive earthquake that completely destroyed the town of Yangshu in China. Before the earthquake, it was home to close to 7,000 people, but the earthquake was so catastrophic that only 2,300 survived. They say about 80% of the town was destroyed. One moment everything was fine, and the next, half of the population was killed. Just horrific. They have continued to rebuild the town after the event, creating a memorial for those that lost their life. In our number 3 spot, we have the town of Bayou Corn. Well, you very well might not know about this one, as this was news to me. However, I am Canadian and not American, so that could be why. But man, you would think a story like this would be known by everyone. In 2012, in Bayou Corn, Louisiana, 350 of its town residents were evacuated due to a sinkhole. That's terrifying. Apparently, some of the residents noticed the ground shaking and then bubbles emerged from the water before they were evacuated. How did this happen? Well, it is the result of the collapse of an underground cavern that had been used to store industrial refuse. But honestly, the mysterious thing about this case is that why it happened, the exact culprit, is still a mystery. There have been quite a few lawsuits around this, but not much has changed. In 2018, it was reported that the sinkhole had eaten up 35 acres. Even though the sinkhole is allegedly more stable now, the town has continued to be abandoned. In our number 2 spot, we have Chernobyl. In 1986, the very disastrous nuclear explosion at Chernobyl in the Ukraine took place and resulted in the evacuation of the people of the town around it. There were more than 100,000 people from the town of Pripyat and around Chernobyl that fled. Dozens were killed and many developed life-threatening illnesses from the incident. But some still stay as it's their home, even though numbers do show a climb in the death rate for the people from that area. Chernobyl is still considered highly radioactive and will not be fully cleared up until 2065, they say. People try and explore the area for adventure, but it is not recommended. In our number 1 spot, we have Yungay. In Peru, there was a thriving town called Yungay that was home to approximately 25,000 people until the 1970s, when an earthquake led to a massive rock slide. This rock slide killed most of its people, approximately 30,000 people from Yungay and towns nearby it. Only about 400 or so people survived. Some were people that climbed the town's steps to the cemetery, which was on a hill, and approximately 300 of them were children that were at a circus, and a clown led them to a higher ground just in time. Wow. The town now remains as a symbol for the catastrophe.
Alright, coming in at number 10, we have Pompeii. Pompeii is such a sad tale. As many of you are likely to know from history class, Pompeii was an ancient city near modern-day Naples in the Campania region of Italy. The issue with Pompeii that it was built at the base of Mount Vesuvius, a volcano that spilled her fury in 79 AD. The city had been in existence for thousands of years before the eruption, and by the time of its demise, it was a thriving Roman hub. The eruption covered Pompeii in 4 to 6 meters of volcanic ash, burying the city but largely preserving a snapshot of Roman life. The lost city of Pompeii was rediscovered over a millennium and a half later and was excavated in the late 1800s. These days, more and more of the city is being uncovered under the ash and pumice. The area draws in 2.5 million tourists now each year who delight in the macabre history of the Roman town. Indeed, it is possible to see ash-covered corpses of bodies nearly 2,000 years old. Coming in at number number 9, gone overnight, we have Chaohu. With a simple flick of an administrative wrist, the Chinese city of Chaohu disappeared overnight, which is pretty worrying. Can China just cancel cities these days? It seems so. Chaohu was a city of 4 million people and was known for housing a Han Dynasty tomb and a large freshwater lake. It seems that the Chinese government is pretty obsessed with economic statuses and statistics, and the reason that the city was effectively deleted was to adjust its borders, giving land to nearby cities to make them seem more profitable, which actually sounds kinda crazy, right? The worrying thing is though, is that there was absolutely no public consultation or official notice, and residents were only aware when they were told that they were living in new parts of old cities. So I live in Toronto, like I said, and I guess it's like waking up in Toronto and it no longer being a thing, and I'm told like, oh, you live in East Niagara now. I guess not a lot would change, but at the same time, everything would change. Weird. So weird. Okay, pinnacle of weird at number 8, we have Taured. Where is Taured? Is it a place or does it exist beyond our universe? We have talked a little bit about the man from Taured on Most Amazing a few times, but now I want to talk more about the country itself. But first, let me recap. In 1954, a man was detained at the Japanese border in Haneda. This is in Japan, and he arrived on a plane from Europe. The man was affronted at the border control officer's questions. He claimed that he was on his third business trip to Japan that year. When he was searched, he had a wallet filled with a mixture of currencies, seeming to verify his business traveler status. When he presented his passport, officials were absolutely baffled. They'd never seen a passport like this before. Asking where he was from, the man, who primarily spoke French, said he was from Taured. I'm sorry, where? Officers were absolutely baffled because, as you probably know, there is no such place. When he was asked to point to it on a map, he pointed somewhere in the locale of Andorra today. He then became confused and agitated that the map he was given didn't actually include Taured. So, was it real? Did it disappear, or did he appear from another dimension? His passport looked legitimate, but he was from the mysterious country. His passport even had stamps in it, legitimate stamps, that seemed to actually cooperate with his story. He was also carrying a checkbook to a non-existent bank branch from Taured. So I guess my question is, even if the passport and checkbook were convincing fakes, how on earth would he even have been able to get on the plane in the first place? Passports are checked at multiple times when you go to an airport, including at check-in and before you're allowed to even board. I for one have like a deep feeling that Taured is real, but where did it go? Once again I ask, is it in another dimension? Because I don't know, I think that. Speaking of other dimensions, this is crazy at number 7, we have the Cloud City. This terrifying city in the sky appeared and disappeared within the space of a day. Chinese media went wild when thousands of residents who live in 2 different cities in the country spotted what looked like a huge floating city in the sky. Have a look and tell me what you think, like what on earth could that even be? The phenomenon was described as being a ghost city by onlookers who saw skyscrapers in the clouds. To me, I'm thinking this is another sign of a parallel universe or something. The phenomenon occurred in both Guangdong and Jiangxi, with some believing it was an alien city. The images were caught on camera for the world to see, so I have to say, what on earth or above earth is going on? Even though it looks like a city in the clouds to you and me, apparently it's an optical illusion called Fata Morgana, which is a natural mirage. That being said, hundreds of people saw this disappearing cloud city, which to me makes me think that actually there might be more to it than simple mirage. A reappearing city up next, we have Villa Epicuen. Oh my goodness, wait until you see pictures from Villa Epicuen. Villa Epicuen was a tourist resort near Buenos Aires in Argentina, but unfortunately it flooded in 1985, meaning the whole town had to be abandoned. Disappearing into the water, Villa Epicuen became a sunken town lost to the perilous tides. However, strangely, the waters began to recede again in 2009, and now, after a drought, you can see more of the town emerging from the water than ever. 25 years after it disappeared, it began to re-emerge, only this time stripped of paint. The trees have died after their time away from the sun, leaving ghostly, chalky-looking twisted roots and leafless branches withering in the ground. Rusted cars and dislodged bathtubs litter the banks, but honestly, it actually looks kinda cool in like a ghostly, scary way. Coming in at number 5, we have Angikuni Lake. This is a spooky Canadian urban legend set in the frozen north of Nunavut, one of Canada's largest and yet least populated territories. The conditions in the Arctic land are pretty terrifying at the best of times. The story goes that in the year 1930, a fur trapper, Joe LaBelle, needed to take shelter from a storm, so he decided to trek to a close-by Inuit village that he said he knew well. He'd been a few times in the past and called out a greeting ahead of his arrival, which was weirdly met with no response. When he arrived in the village, he found that its entire population had vanished. Stranger still, it appeared that inside the houses, food was still kept in stocks, and there were even some half-eaten meals on tables. It was as if everyone had fled at a moment's notice. LaBelle reported the incident to the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. Now, after months of investigation, they never found much of a trace of the residents. These days, the village can't be found at all, which has led many people to think that it simply never existed. Coming into number 4, we have Ashley. The story goes that in August 1952, the small town of Ashley in Kansas, USA, disappeared following a magnitude 7.9 on the Richter scale earthquake. The earthquake was said to have taken place at 3:28 AM, meaning the town's 679 residents were all in bed. The epicenter of the earthquake was none other than Ashley Town Center. Now, the urban legend says that when state law enforcement arrived at what should have been the outskirts of the farming community, they found a smoldering, burning crack in the earth measuring 100 yards in length and approximately 500 yards in width. Back in the day when we did things in yards. The depth of the hole was never determined. Many people think that the story of the disappeared town is none other than a creepypasta. Others say that there was indeed an earthquake on record in Kansas and that the town was lost, being too small to be on any maps in the first place. Honestly, I'm not sure. Coming into number 3, we have the story of Wharram. This is a Brazilian ghost story. Or are the legends of the disappearance of Wharram real? The story goes that in 1923, a group of explorers came by the village of Wharram in the Brazilian jungle, supposedly a town of just 600 people. It seems that the explorers were shocked to find the town utterly deserted. They looked in houses and found things in a state of sudden disarray, chairs knocked over, food still on tables, clothes still in cupboards, cars still in driveways. According to the story, police were called to the town and they found a cryptic clue. It seems that one of the townsfolk had left behind a gun that, on examination, seemed to have recently been fired. Aside the gun, there was a mysterious message that read, "There is no salvation." Some people think that the town was abandoned in order to avoid conflict with guerrilla militias, which were a problem at the time. Others think that the disappearance had something to do with religion. To this day, nobody knows. Coming into number 2, we have the crazy story of the town on fire. Did you know that there is a legitimate abandoned town in Pennsylvania that is not only empty, but has been on fire for decades? Centralia was a thriving mining town in Columbia County with a population of a few thousand. These days, just 7 remain, clinging on to their doomed homes. It seems that all was well in Centralia for a very long time. It had been an active mine since the mid-1800s. Unfortunately, since 1962, it has been burning from the inside. It is suspected that the fire started from deliberate trash burning and could well keep burning for a further 250 years, which is absolutely insane. The residents first noticed the fire when smoke began billowing from the ground, accompanied by a foul smell of burning trash. Not only that, carbon monoxide was detected seeping from the ground. With temperatures hotter than the planet Mercury, it was decided that it was too dangerous to even try putting out the flames, and as a result, the town was evacuated slowly. But many people remained living there until 1981. That was when a 12-year-old boy fell into a sinkhole that suddenly opened up in his backyard. He survived by clinging onto a tree root, but from the hole came a plume of hot steam found to contain poisonous gas. That was it for the rest of the town. These days the town is deserted save from 7 people who just won't leave, but once again, that fire still burns. Okay, are you ready for the saddest story that you'll hear today? Coming into number 1, we have Ordor-sur-Glane. This town was eradicated in one day at the merciless hands of the Nazis. During the German invasion of France in the Second World War, the village of Ordor corridor Sug Lane was the subject of a bloody massacre. On June 10, 1944, SS soldiers destroyed the village, killing 642 of its inhabitants. There was one sole survivor of the attack and 20 escapees. Now the SS invaded and rounded up men and shot them at point blank range in the barn, which actually may have been a better fate than that awarded to the women and children. They were rounded up into a church that was then set on fire by the German soldiers. You can imagine how that ended. Former French President Charles de Gaulle ordered that the town remain untouched as a memorial to those who lost their lives there. Cars lay in ruins, buildings are crumbling, and shops contain what was left of their stocks after the village was ransacked. Tourists can now visit the town remains and nearby memorial centre. I'd actually love to go and pay my respects. It sounds creepy, but honestly historically really cool. I'd better watch out though, because the ransacked town is said to be haunted, and of course it is. Coming in at number 10, we have the unreachable town of Urkhammer. Is this a true story? If so, well, I'm scared. It seems like there did indeed used to be a town by the name of Urkhammer in Iowa in the early 1900s. It was a farming town with a relatively small population. However, it was noted in the mid-1900s that it had been entirely abandoned and nobody knows why. That isn't even the scary bit either. There is a worrying story associated with the town. Whether or not it's true or false, I simply don't know. But, well, have a listen. A tourist passed through the town in the early 1950s and bought some gas at a gas station. As he drove out of town, he realised his gas dial was still on empty. Sure enough, he'd been ripped off. He turned around to confront the station workers, but he never seemed to reach the town. He was sure that he'd only been driving for 5 minutes, but after turning around for 10 minutes, he actually never made it back. Soon he ran out of gas and decided to continue back into town on foot. It was his only option really, didn't have any gas. He kept walking and saw the town in the distance, but he could never reach it. Eventually he was picked up by a passing car who said that they had not driven through a town for hours. Weird. Coming in at number 9, we have Luto Katuto. Sounds fake. In March 2018, a major landslide led to the destruction of over 100 houses, wiping away the small town of Luto Katuto overnight. Have a look at the damage. The landslide has led to Luto Katuto being dubbed the town that the earth swallowed, and it's easy to see why. Now the cracks began appearing around 10 years before the major landslide in March 2018, but the government simply told the town residents to fill it with dirt. Town resident Giorgio Abeja spoke to the press and said that a loud noise woke him up in the night. The town was sinking. Luckily he was able to escape with his life. The town should never have been built on the clay ground, as it was always vulnerable to landslides. Sadly, 106 families were displaced as a result of the sinking. Another town swallowed whole at number 8, we have Bayou Corny. The controversial case of Bayou Corny sinkhole has been settled with the Texas Brine Company at fault. In 2012, the town of Bayou Corny was evacuated when bubbles began rising in nearby water and there was increased seismic activity in the earth. Tim Murphy, a journalist for The Atlantic, said that Bayou Corny is the biggest ongoing industrial disaster in the United States that you haven't heard of. For some reason, nobody really talks about it. 350 residents have been turfed out of their home because their town is sinking before their very eyes. The disappearance of this town led to it being dubbed as Demon Alley. Coming into number 7, we have the New City Complex. The New City Complex was built in West Milford, New Jersey. The town was located along Route 32 and was built by the city of Newark Water and Reservoir Plant in order to provide housing for plant workers. Located along Route 23, the town is now entirely abandoned and nobody knows why, although of course there are theories. It is said that the town pretty much dissolved overnight in 1992. Rumour has it that the seeming exodus happened after a dodgy person moved to the town in the late 1980s. Others say that the town was never a town at all, just a set of a movie which has been left to crumble. So, is it an inexplicably abandoned town or an urban legend? Coming into number 6, we have the Roanoke. What happened to the people of Roanoke? It is a question still baffling us 430 years later, as it seems that not one but 2 occasions the town actually totally disappeared. Twice! Let me start from the beginning. In 1585, a small group of settlers made Roanoke Island off the coast of North Carolina their home, although many left when they found the conditions to be unsatisfactory. In 1587, 115 English settlers came to join those who had left, but weirdly they found no one. Like, absolutely no one. Weirdly though, they didn't seem to be too disturbed by that, assuming they must have just upped and left because they didn't like it. At the time, the colony decided to send their governor, a John White, back to England to gather fresh supplies and fresh settlers to expand the colony. He went back, and then 3 years later he returned with his supplies to the colony. He'd left his wife and daughter there. He was expecting a big reunion, but once again, he found no traces of the inhabitants, just like the time the settlers had arrived, only this time he knew something was wrong because his family wouldn't have upped and left without telling him. The only clue he found was the word Croatoan carved into a wooden post, which is extremely strange. So where did the settlers of the Roanoke go? They were absolutely never seen again. Now some theorists say that they were killed by a Native American tribe, although the fact that there was no trace of their bodies is absolutely suspicious. Others say that they decided to sail back to England for some reason or another but got lost at sea, but again, I'm saying this town disappeared twice, so there really has to be something else going on. Coming into number 5, we have Christmas, Arizona. I love a good abandoned town, I really do. I went to Calico in California back in December 2017 and it was so interesting and spooky, but now I really want to visit this town even more. Meet the lost town of Santa Claus in Arizona. Santa Claus! The town was so popular with Christmas lovers despite its untraditional setting in the desert. The town was founded in 1937 and created as a Christmas resort, just, you know, cause. A Swiss chalet, and no I don't mean the chicken place, a Swiss themed house is what I mean, and plenty of Christmas trees, a life-size dollhouse, a Christmas themed inn. Basically kids could sit on Santa's lap all year round and they loved it. Until they didn't. Just stopped being a town. It's now abandoned by the side of the road. Instead of Christmas pies and elves, all you'll find these days are rattlesnakes, and while I love the sound of this, at the same time I feel like it would have sucked for the employees. I once worked as an elf in a toy store and I felt like I had too much Christmas, so the actual day was a bit of a letdown, so imagine that being all year. To be honest, I'm actually thinking maybe Santa Claus in Arizona is better off disappeared. Coming into number 4, we have Petra. Petra is located in southern Jordan in the Middle East and was settled in the early 9000 BCE. By the 4th century BCE, it was the capital of the Nabatean kingdom. Petra was carved into the rock, but after the Roman Empire took over the city, it started to disappear. At first, the population diminished in around the 7th and 8th centuries. Then the city became abandoned for centuries, with very little footfall due to its remote location. Petra lay forgotten and all but disappeared as a result of natural disasters and neglect. It was off the map for a very long time until Swiss explorers rediscovered the city in 1812. As stories dribbled back to Europe of a lost town, intrigue grew. Local folklore claimed that the city has been created by the Wand of Moses, having actually lost touch with the actual history of the forgotten city. In 1929, archaeologists led an excavation of the city. In 2016, even more of the city was discovered buried in the sands. Coming into number 3, we have the cities of the Amazon. When the dastardly colonists invaded swathes of the world, they brought back stories when they returned to their homelands. The Spanish returned home to regale stories of vast cities made of gold and filled with treasure along the Amazon. Some called it the City of Zed, others called it El Dorado. This led hungry explorers to seek out the cities, only when they got there, they never found them. Ever. All they found was thick jungle. The golden cities that early pioneers had spoken of became nothing but myth and legend. That was until recently. In 2010, aerial images taken by National Geographic revealed earthworks spanning 155 miles in the Amazon. As Amazonian rainforests have been cleared for agriculture, further evidence of ancient pre-Columbian movements have been found. So speaking of the somewhat mythical, we have Atlantis at number 2. So bearing in mind that a lot of people believe that the Amazonian cities were a myth, but now it's looking like they may well have been legit, what do we think the deal with Atlantis is? It's enduring, I'll say that. Atlantis is a legendary city that is mentioned in a number of pieces of ancient Greek literature, including by the late great philosopher Plato. It is said that Atlantis was a thriving city filled with affluence and positivity. That was until it sank. Atlantis was said to have sunk in the sea in a single day and night. There's been a lot of speculation as to where that city may be. People people have searched the Straits of Gibraltar between Africa and Spain and found nothing as of yet. If Atlantis was real, it would be over 11,000 years old according to our calculations. I actually do kind of have a feeling that we may one day find this lost city. Finally, coming into number 1, we have Langville, Montana. This is actually utterly creepy. It really has freaked me out. I was doing some heavy research into disappeared places and towns and spaces, and Google autocomplete kept suggesting Langville, Montana disappearance. Now, it would appear at the bottom in related searches too, as would Langville, Montana incident or Langville, Montana turned inside out, which is some Stranger Things stuff if I've ever heard of it. Oddly, when I clicked the link or even searched it up in the search bar, the internet yielded absolutely no information. Not a sausage. To me, this makes things even weirder, right? Why am I being suggested a mystery town when there's no evidence of it? I'm thinking that not only did this town disappear, but its data was also expunged from the internet. Why? I love a good cover-up theory, and let me make it even better with some investigative journalism. Here is the Google trend page for Langville, Montana disappeared. As you can see, it was actually frequently searched for in July and August 2018, then a few times after. Here I've compared it to searches for me, my name. I'm not saying people Google me a lot, but I am a real person on a channel with a lot of subscribers, so it does happen. So there was a time when Langville, Montana was being Googled loads, like super loads. Again, I'm just saying, why is there no record if people are Googling it? Questions, we need answers. Coming in at number 10, we have Audley's Town. Historians are baffled by the lost County Down Irish village of Audley's Town. The town was run by landowner, the then Lord of the Land Viscount Bangor, who lived in the town's manor, Castlewood. When he died, his wife remarried and evicted all of the townsfolk. She then sent them off on a boat called the Rose, and they were told to set sail to Boston. The Rose left in 1852, but the boat never arrived in the New World. Some say that Lady Bangor's new husband, Major Savage Nugent, hated the townfolk and had them killed. These days the town is covered over by woodland, and part of the disappeared town was used as the setting for Game of Thrones. Coming into number 9, we have the trenches. This is so sad. During World War I, Europe kinda lost it. I say kind of, like it literally did. Countries turned on one another and fought a bloody battle to the death. On one side was Great Britain, France, Russia, Italy, Canada, and eventually Japan and the United States. On the other was Germany, Austro-Hungary, Bulgaria, and the Ottoman Empire. From October 1914 to March 1918, neither side made much ground and were stuck in a deadlock battle fought in trenches along the western front of France. It is thought that the total length of the trenches was around 2,490 kilometers. Not only did millions of people die in the trenches, they lived in them too. They were forced to live in squalid conditions. Millions and millions of men. For all intent and purpose, these long thin trenches were towns. Then, as the war was over, the trenches were abandoned, leaving a history of bloodshed and violence in the ground. This is what they looked like over 100 years ago, and now this is what they look like today. This is the battlefield from Beaumont-Hamel in France, a notable fighting spot in the Battle of the Somme. Haunting. Coming into number 8 is Calico. Here is a picture of me at Calico Ghost Town in California. I stumbled across the place on Christmas Eve in 2017. It was a very interesting time of life for me then, and coming across a ghost town seemed to kind of fit with that weird and intense era. So Calico was an old silver mining town in the San Bernardino mountain range. The town was a flash in the pan of the silver rush era and was abandoned in 1907, with a brief return in 1915 when a cyanide plant was built to try and restore economic fortune. Sadly for Calico, it was to no avail. The town is undoubtedly mysterious and spooky, up in the mountains and in the middle of the desert, which is pretty remote. It is also said that the town is haunted by not one but 5 ghosts. There's a little girl ghost who only appears to children. There's also a ghost named Tumbleweed Harris, the lady in a white gown who wanders the outskirts of town, an angry cowboy, and the ghost of a dog named Dorsey. Coming into number 7, we have the Library of Alexandria. Alexandria is a coastal city in Egypt, sitting at the south of the Mediterranean Sea. The city dates back to 331 BC and was once the thriving capital of Egypt, but was reduced to nothing nothing more than a small fishing village in the late Ottoman period. Brutal ransackings and an earthquake destroyed a lot of the original ancient landmarks, including the Alexandria Lighthouse and Cleopatra's tomb, which has notably never been found. Most notably, however, was the biggest loss suffered by the city, the destruction of the Library of Alexandria. Now, this was a massive library, so big that it was hailed as the most significant in the ancient world. It was said to contain the equivalent of 100,000 books, which in the early days of the written word was a lot. It's uncertain who destroyed the library, just that it's no longer there. Julius Caesar's been blamed, but so have many people who ransacked the city over its history. Moreover, while the city has been discussed a lot in literature, we don't know for sure if it ever really existed. Alexandria as a city was rebuilt eventually, and a city of the same name stands in its place, but the original landmark is by and large lost to the ground in the ocean, taking many of the secrets of the ancient world with it. Another ancient one up for you next. At number 6, we have the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. Now, the Gardens of Babylon were one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. They've been described as some of the most fantastical roof gardens of all time and were thought to have been located in Babylonia in Iraq. The gardens were believed to have been destroyed sometime after the 1st century AD, and many archaeologists have spent their lives looking for their remains. The existence is not confirmed by archaeological findings, and there have been suggestions that the gardens are mythical. That being said, they were thought to be in Iraq, and much of the country has been super ravaged by war over the years. Okay, I have to deviate from this video for a second to ask if anyone else remembers the Hanging Gardens of Babylon in Bill and Ted, because I absolutely swear that there was a Babylon bit, but I can't find it anywhere online, and rather like the gardens themselves, I'm thinking, are they mythical, or is this like a Mandela effect thing that I've just discovered? Let me know. Coming into number 5, we have Tyneham. Tyneham in England is a pretty spooky village indeed. The ghost village in South Dorset was abandoned in 1943 at the height of World War II. It was abandoned for fear of bombardment from the German forces. 225 villagers were rehomed, all of which thought that they would return after the war, but mysteriously the British government purchased the land and kept it for military training. The village is now opened at various times of the year for controlled tourism, but those who have been lucky enough to visit claim that it's very spooky indeed. In fact, some even claim that the village telephone rings even though it's disconnected from wires. The village was featured in a television show, Mysteries of the Abandoned, and this is what was said by visitors.
The village pond looks like any other village pond in England, except there's no wildlife there. There are no ducks. It's eerily empty.
Shut the front door! No ducks on the pond! Must be cursed, right? I have to say that the documentary is super dramatic and I kinda love it. They claim that it's eerie and that the church remains as it was in the 40s. Have a listen to this. I'm very, very here for the dramatic music.
Add a darker narrative. Like the cottages, which are little more than empty shells.
And these are in an unusual state of disrepair.
Da da da! But where are the ducks? Questions. Coming in at number 4, we have the lost villages of the St. Lawrence. Controversially, in 1958, 9 villages were flooded along the St. Lawrence River in Canada. Now, this was to make way for the St. Lawrence Seaway. The project was unpopular as 6,500 people were displaced, and of those people, the residents believed that the money that they got for their homes wasn't enough because the plans had already depressed property value. The villages were all in Ontario and are now under the water in the St. Lawrence River. Some of the areas are now popular scuba diving spots. Eerily though, it is possible to spot the outlines of the villages from the water when levels are low. Another sunken city at number 3, we have the withered city of Villa Epicuan. Villa Epicuan was a popular tourist resort near Buenos Aires, Argentina, but unfortunately it flooded in 1985, which meant that hopes and livelihoods had to be abandoned in the water. Can you imagine? Disappearing into the water, Villa Epicuan became a sunken town. However, weirdly, the waters began to recede in 2009, and now, after a drought, you can see more of the town emerging from the water than ever. 25 years after it disappeared, it began to re-emerge, only this time it was totally white, stripped of paint. The trees have died after their time underwater and away from the sun, and now they're white too, and the whole thing just looks ghostly and twisted and withered. Rusted cars and dislodged bathtubs litter the bank. Honestly, it looks so scary to me, but I also Kinda love it. This town or city, more like, still exists but may not in our lifetime, so I want to give you a little warning at number 2. We have Venice. Venice is sinking. The historic town is made from 118 small islands connected by bridges and dates back to the 10th century BCE. The issue is here climate change and tourism. Cruise ships are turning up in the harbour, which disturbs the waters. Thousands of passengers disembark from the ships and trample the city, rarely without buying anything and contributing to the economy that could actually help save the city. The old buildings of Venice don't have stable foundations and they're gradually subsiding into the waters of the lagoon. Marry that with tourism and overcrowding and the rise in ocean levels in general, and it seems very much on the brink. It would be devastating to lose this city. Finally, coming into number 1, we have Happy Valley. Happy Valley is not a happy place to be. The town used to be known as Williamstown and is located between Syracuse and Camden in upstate New York. Founded in 1850, the town was a farming community, but it was abandoned in the Great Depression. That being said, the Depression probably wasn't the reason people left, if the rumors are to be believed anyway. It is said that the men of Williamstown angered a witch that lived on the fringes of the community. How they angered her? Well, some say they taunted her, others say they abused her. Either way, in a fit of rage, the town was suddenly struck with plague that killed a whole chunk of the population. On top of that, crops began failing. Today, those in surviving towns near Happy Valley claim that actually it is haunted and they will not venture into the abandoned spot.
Starting us off at number 10, Bannock, Montana, USA. So Bannock was founded in 1862 when John White discovered gold on Grasshopper Creek. 2 years later, it became the first territorial capital of Montana before it changed to Virginia City. At its peak, it had a population of 10,000 people. You know, quite a bit for back then. But the sheriff was accused by some of leading the ruthless band of road agents called the Innocents. Early accounts claim the gang was responsible for the murders of over 100 innocent people, though historical records account for about 8. So it's kind of iffy. The sheriff and 2 deputies were hanged without trial in Bannock in 1864. 22 individuals were accused, informally tried, and hung by the Vigilance Committee, which is the Montana Vigilantes, of Bannock and Virginia City. So the city kept going into the 1930s with a fluctuating population, but then, in the 50s, gold workings dwindled, and then Bannock was declared a state park. The last residents left in the 70s. So all that with the Wild West, and then it's a state park now. Kinda funny. On to number 9, St. Elmo, Colorado, USA. So St. Elmo is the best preserved ghost town in all of Colorado, and it boasts the most hauntings and paranormal activity of any ghost town in the state. So it was settled in 1878 as Forest City and officially became St. Elmo in 1880. It was a gold mining settlement, just like many on this list, and the Mary Murphy mine recovered over $60 million worth of gold while it was in operation. It's just a lot of gold. But it's not a complete ghost town right now since it is privately owned with part-time inhabitants as of right now. You could even say the ghosts there are part-time inhabitants too. The most famous one is Dirty Annie. Her real name was Annabelle Stark, but she got her nickname Dirty Annie after her mother passed away. Annie and her brother were left to run the hotel their mother used to run while their father was in the mines. Since their mother was harsh and strict on cleanliness, after her passing, Annie would walk around in filthy clothing with her hair in a mess as a form of quiet rebellion. But anyways, some people say they have still seen her walking around the town, just strutting her stuff, hair a mess, filthy clothes. And then those who inherited the hotel swear the hotel went cold and all of the doors slammed shut when their grandchildren were playing inside. So could that have been Dirty Annie as well? Just toying with the kids? Number 8, Bodie, California, USA. So this ghost town sprung up after William Bodie hit gold in 1859. Then from 1877 to 1882, it had more than 10,000 residents and produced over $35 million in gold and silver. Also, at one point, there were reported to be 65 saloons in town in addition to brothels, gambling halls, and opium dens. Like, it was the Wild West after all, but that's a lot of saloons. But sometimes that mix of money, gold, and alcohol would lead to unexpected fatalities. Newspapers reported that townspeople would ask in the mornings, "Have we a man for breakfast?" I don't know how to do a southern accent. Anyways, that meant, did anyone get killed last night? Because that's just how it was there. But not anymore. Now there are over 200 abandoned wooden buildings in what is Bodie State Historic Park. The buildings are not restored, but preserved. So you can go see a little bit of the Wild West yourself if you want. Number 7, Cerro Gordo, California, USA. So silver was discovered in Buena Vista Peak in 1865. Its discovery brought in miners, but also unsavory characters. At one point, the death rate was 1 person per week. There was no sheriff for miles around, and even the doctor fled the town, scared for his life. Basically, it had a reputation for death. So once Union Mine closed down in 1938, the population also died down. As of right now, there is one resident, Robert de Moraes, who is coincidentally a former miner. He serves as the town's unofficial caretaker. Number 6. Cahalba, Alabama. Cahalba became a ghost town shortly after the Civil War. It was once the capital, but that title was taken away. What is really interesting to me is its ghost, Peague's ghost. In 1862, the story goes that a young couple was out for a walk on a moonlit night. Romantic. As they walked behind Colonel C.C. Peague's house, a glowing ball of white light seemingly just appeared before them. It was just floating on the air. This ball would dart first on one side of the walk and then on the other, and then approach close enough to almost touch them, and then recede and disappear into the shrubbery. And then suddenly it was seen beside them floating again. So they thought the apparition was a trick or something fancy, maybe caused by the same peculiar phase of moon shadows, something like that. So they turned to retrace their steps, and then it happened again and appeared in front of them. Went through the same thing. So at this point, the man and his lady determined to test the materiality of the object, but then he tried to grab it, and then it darted just beyond his reach, disappeared, saw not again. Other people have seen it, and the glowing light, will-o-wisp, or whatever it was, from then on was known as Peague's ghost. Number 5. Kennecott, Alaska, USA. Up and to the left in Alaska is Kennecott. It was once a thriving 20th century copper mining town, and it is now desolate. From 1911 to 1938, Kennecott employed as many as 300 people in the mill town and 300 in the mines. It processed nearly $200 million worth of copper, but once the copper tapped out, the company that established the town quickly withdrew from the settlement. Kennecott Copper Corporation left abruptly and left behind their equipment, buildings, and belongings. So now the National Park Service and tour operators offer guided access to several historic buildings, including the 14-story concentration mill. That'd be something fun to see, I think. In that mill, they apparently talk about the tales of lucky fortunes, frontiersmen, and tragic endings that occurred in the remote wilderness. Number 4. Shakespeare, New Mexico, USA. Shakespeare was an old mining town that was frequented by outlaws. It was called Mexican Springs first, then Grand, and then became Ralston City when it was a mining town in 1870. When the silver started running low, the population began to run low as well. But then in 1879, before it was about to be a ghost town first time, most of the land in the city was bought by Colonel William G. Boyle. He gave the town a new start under the name Shakespeare. So apparently Billy the Kid washed dishes at a hotel there, and 2 notorious cattle raiders were captured and hung. The records state that the 2 were hung because Russian Bill stole a horse and Sandy King was just a damn nuisance. So Shakespeare closed down after a bigger town sprung up 3 miles away and the mines closed after the Depression of 1893. So it is now a historic site, preserved as a monument to the real Old West. A lot of these are out, Old West. Pop up for mining, and then they're done. This is me mining now. Number 3. Burke, Idaho, USA. So mines were built in 1884 for silver and lead in Burke, and then the town was built after that. What makes this place cozy is that it is built in a canyon that at its widest measures 300 feet wide. Because of this, the railroad went directly through town and shared the way with cars. Whenever the train passed through, cars would have to pull over. When the railway expanded, it ran right through the town's hotel. A covered walkway connected 2 sides of the buildings, and it let 5 cars of the Northern Pacific Railroad pass through each day. But not everything was well and good in the cozy little town. There were tensions between the miners and the owners of the mines. In 1892, gunshots broke out between Union men and the replacement workers in the mine. The gunfight escalated and ignited a box of dynamite in one of the mills, causing 6 men to die. It got so bad that the governor of Idaho sent National Guards to Burke and declared martial law. But it didn't stop there. In 1899, when Bunker Hill Mining Company fired 17 miners for joining the Union, in response the laborers dynamited the Bunker Hill mine and more lives were lost. Then, with all of that history, plus other natural disasters like fires and avalanches, there is talk of paranormal activity in the area. Number 2. Terlinga, Texas, USA. The nickname of this town is Terlinga Ghost Town, and the motto is the Texas Ghost Town. It's also both a ghost town and not at the same time, I would say, because in the mid-1880s the discovery of cinnabar brought miners to the town, bringing the population to 2,000 people, but not much is left of those mining days. Now all that's left is a ghost town of the Chisos Mining Company and several nearby capped and abandoned mines. But also, the 2010 census set it at a population of 58 people. This is mainly due to its proximity to Big Bend National Park, so it's mainly a tourist destination. There's also reported sightings of Elvis singing at the cemetery, so it can seem like Las Vegas in the desert, I guess. More of a desert. Las Vegas isn't really a desert, Last but not least, number 1, Buddville, New Mexico, USA. So Buddville was a tiny community along Route 66. It was established in 1928 by Howard Neal Bud Rice and his wife Flossie. They made many businesses and Bud cozied up to local law enforcement, but also overcharged at his auto shop and imposed fines for those caught in his speeding traps. That may have not made too many people happy. In 1967, a stranger, thought to be Billy Ray White, entered the trading post and shot and killed Bud and a part-time employee. The assailant left with $450. That day changed the nickname of Budville to Bloodville, literally. Budville was still occupied until 1979 when Bud's widow Flossie passed away, and so it's now a ghost town, bought and sold many times throughout the years. Even though Route 66 isn't used, it has its own exit and entrance off the interstate because he cozied up to people that much. But those are the top 10 mysterious ghost towns I have for you today. I'll have you know that number 2, Terlinga, is also home to both of the original chili cook-offs, the Chili Appreciation Society International and the World Chili Championship. I thought I'd mention it because I just really like chili. It's so good. Yeah. Comment below if you like chili. No, I'm kidding. Comment below if you would ever investigate or maybe even live in one of these ghost towns, and while you're down there, make sure to give us a like and subscribe and ring that bell to be notified when we post. I've been your host Abby, and until next time, have a good one and goodbye.
Starting off in our number 10 spot, we have California. I know we're starting off with a state here rather than a city, but the whole state really is at risk. There was a time not too long ago where California was sitting pretty, enjoying themselves, while other places were beginning to see the effects of the rising sea levels, but that has all changed quite quickly. In the last 100 years, the sea level in California rose less than 9 inches, but by the end of this century, it could rise as much as 9 feet, which is a huge and rapid jump. With California mostly focusing on the wildfire and drought effects of climate change, which is of course just as imminent of a threat, it seems as though the threats of the rising sea levels are slipping through the cracks. The coastline is rapidly eroding, which puts anything even close to the shore at the greatest risk, not to mention places like Balboa Island, which are already barely above sea level as is, and are currently facing floods if the tide gets too high. While the shoreline was once the ideal spot to park a new, beautiful, multi-million-dollar home in California, it seems like those who went more inland might have not only made a financially smarter decision, but also a climate smarter decision. In our number 9 spot today, we have New York City. Oh, New York, New York. The Big Apple is unfortunately at risk due to the rising sea levels, and things are not looking good. All coastal cities are in a dangerous position, but being on an island certainly exacerbates that issue. It is said that the sea level may rise 4 to 8 inches over the next decade, and while this may not seem like a lot, a 5-foot rise would mean that places like LaGuardia Airport would be submersed, as well as large portions of Manhattan. And that's just what is possible in the next 50 years. It is said that by the year 2100, mostly all of New York will be underwater. Sadly, it is said that Queens is the New York borough that is going to be hit the hardest in the next few years, as it is the most at risk for flooding. It is said that as early as 2045, 7,200 residents of Queens could be faced with chronic flooding, which would lead to over $1.2 billion in property damage over the next 30 years. In our number 8 spot today, we have Miami. Beautiful Miami has been seeing the effects of rising sea levels for a while now, despite their best efforts to combat it. Sometimes Mother Nature is just too powerful. The city has been seen doing things like installing pumps and raising roads, and there currently is talks of how to go about raising the structures in the city, but unfortunately the city is rapidly disappearing. Other than the rising sea levels, Miami is at such a great risk because most of the city underground is built upon porous limestone, which allows water to just rise right up through it, and the other issue is of course the rising sea. It is said that Miami might see a water rise of somewhere from 10 to 30 feet by the end of the century, and it is also said that there's virtually no scenario where Miami will exist at the end of the century. That sure is grim. In our number 7 spot today, we have New Orleans. A NASA study found that New Orleans was sinking at a rate of around 2 inches per year. This may not seem like a lot, but it would be a lot to see a 2-inch change every decade, so considering this is every year, it is not a good situation. In In fact, some parts of the city are already 15 feet below sea level. The risk is only increased by the city's location on a river delta, which puts it at a higher risk for things like the rising sea and for flooding. Before, the wetlands would have provided some kind of shelter or shield from storm surges, but that has slowly been destroyed by humans, which leaves the city in an even more vulnerable position. It is said that by 2100, New Orleans will see the same fate as many other cities on this list today. In our number 6 spot today, we have London. London is a place that could be facing extreme flooding in just a short 30 years from now, especially in the southern parts of the city. The risk is so imminent that scientists have created an interactive map which shows which areas have the highest risk, along with their current predictions of what the years to come will look like for the city. The areas that currently have the highest risk are of course places around the Thames, which include things like Big Ben, the House of Parliament, the Tower of London, and King's College, as well as large portions of the city's underground subway system. I'm not sure how many people in London rely on the subway every day, but here in Toronto, if parts of the subway became unusable, there would truly be chaos. Aside from rising sea levels, the threats include things like big storms and future erosion to the land as well. At our halfway mark today, we have Houston. Houston, Texas is unlike a lot of the others on this list today, as it is not a coastal city, and the rising sea level alone certainly isn't enough to cause it to disappear, but it is another one of those cities that is sinking at a rate of around 2 inches per year. The main reason for this is due to excessive groundwater pumping. This process leads to a change in pressure and volume, which in turn causes the land to sink. The sinking land only makes the city more susceptible to flooding, similar to what was experienced during Hurricane Harvey. Unfortunately, scientists are also only expecting an increase in storms and hurricanes, and that, coupled with the sinking land, is a perfectly horrible recipe for the city to be underwater sooner rather than later. In our number 4 spot today, we have Honolulu. This popular Hawaiian destination spot is one of the most at-risk places of being submerged in water due to the rising sea levels. Honolulu is the capital of the Hawaiian state, and I mean, considering the entire state is made up of islands, all of Hawaii really is at stake here. Even a small rise in sea levels is noticed here, as it is estimated that as little as an inch of rising sea results in losing 8 feet of shoreline. This is a massive issue, as sea levels are predicted to rise several feet in the next decade alone. 2/3 of the Hawaiian population live on the island that is home to Honolulu, so it is obvious that this is going to cause a lot of major problems for the residents there. In our number 3 spot today, we have Alexandria. Alexandria is a Mediterranean port city that is located in Egypt, and it is the 7th largest city in Africa. The city is known for its historical value, as it is said to have been founded by Alexander the Great, and it was once connected to a small island called Pharos. Pharos is relevant because it once housed a lighthouse that was one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. This area is thought to have been extremely promising because of its coastal location, and it provided to be just that, as well as an important industrial center because of its natural gas and oil pipelines. But now, some of the things that once made it so enticing might be what brings it to its demise. The beaches of Alexandria have already been seen disappearing because of the rising sea levels. There have been estimations that the Mediterranean Sea will rise by around 2 feet by 2100. This may not be the largest sea level rise that we've talked about today, but considering the fact that this is an area where the rising sea has already affected those who reside there, who knows what 2 more feet will do. In our number 2 spot today, we have Lagos. Lagos, Nigeria is the home to over 24 million people, and it is also one of the most at-risk places due to the rising sea levels. The streets of the city are already often flooded, and the issue is only predicted to get worse. Because of climate change, the city is expected to see less rainfall overall, but more intense storms when it does rain, which is a major cause for concern, especially when coupled with the eroding coastline and rising seas. In a 2012 study from the University of Plymouth, it was said that a rising sea level of only 3 feet would have catastrophic effects on this region. This is a huge issue because global sea levels are expected to rise by at least 4 feet by the end of the century, which means that the issues Lagos is currently facing are only going to get worse if something isn't done, and fast. In our number 1 spot today, we have Venice. Scientists have warned that if something doesn't change soon, Venice is on track to be completely submerged in water by 2100, and that is because the Mediterranean Sea is on the rise and is predicted to see a growth of over 4 feet in the next century, which would prove to be devastating to this coastal city. Not only has it been said for years that Venice is sinking, but the city has also been seeing an increase of some of the worst floods in history, which surely cannot be a good sign. Italy has been doing work to try and combat the frequent flooding by doing things like building flood barriers, but while they were supposed to be finished a decade ago, they still aren't done, and Venice is seeing the effects of that delay. Not only is the city and its residents at risk, but the historical architecture of the city is also facing some troubles even now. During the worst time in the city for flooding, the water can sometimes be seen as high as 4 feet, which has left the city no choice but to build catwalks so that people can still get around the city without having to swim to work.